It is live. All right. Well, listen, we want to welcome anybody else that's just joining us here. We have a number of people that are on Zoom, and we're having prayer time together with each other, and we're about to enter into the Bible study for tonight. And I know for some of you, we've been going through this Bible study together on Wednesday night, so it's familiar. Some of you have not been in the book of Ecclesiastes at all. So I want to try and approach it from that aspect. And try and be careful with this so that you're able to kind of get a feel for where we are, what's going on. Hi, Wayne. Wayne joined us there as well, and we'll see how things go in this multiple platform thing going on here. So, if you can, just for the time being, if you could mute your own microphones, you don't have to mute the video, but mute your microphones on that end, and we'll let this be kind of a one-way thing. Unless we come to a point. Well, no, actually, if you mute your microphones, if you have an answer to a question, unmute, talk about that, and then mute it back up again. That way we won't have too much ambient noise going on as we walk through this time, and hopefully that'll allow the Okay. So anyways, I know I can mute some people, but if I do that, then it's one more role that I have to play in the 15 roles I'm playing right now. So I want to try and avoid that if I can. And we'll just try and move through this time together. Listen, Ecclesiastes, we've been looking at on Wednesday nights. It's interesting because we have talked about the word, and this is the most crucial part really of where we've been. And so the people who have been with us will they'll know this already. But we've been talking about the word vanity in the book of Ecclesiastes and what vanity truly means. It is interesting to realize that there's a better interpretation for vanity than simply just an emptiness. Although the emptiness is there, the emptiness is caused by something that the word vanity is better interpreted as. And that is the idea that things are fleeting, that they're flying away, that they're going fast. And I know for those of us that have a number of years under our belt, I don't know how else to say that, it's easy for us to feel like time is just going faster and faster and faster. And I think that's Solomon's point as we walk through the book of Ecclesiastes is that all of these things in relationship to the pace at which life is leaving us, all of these things are just fleeting. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, some of this we might go through a little bit fast. You're welcome to go back and find we don't have the videos, but I can certainly provide you some of the Bible studies from the past that we've done in written form so you can work through them if you would like to. So when we talk about the word fleeting, that's really the word in the book of Ecclesiastes that is the word vanity. It's not just empty, it's empty because it's just flying away. Without certain things, life is just flying away. So we're gonna walk through that together and see how this works. I'm trying to see. There we are. Okay, we're working. Look at Ecclesiastes. So we broke down Ecclesiastes this way, and I'm going to march through this really fast. There's all kinds of debate about how to outline the book of Ecclesiastes, a lot of debate. So we kind of did it arbitrarily. We just looked at a number of times through the book where the preacher is mentioned, and that's how we broke the book down. So the preacher introduces the learning objectives. Kind of sounds like a lesson for poor Bryn and the teachers that are teaching from home here, but that's how he starts. He introduces the learning objectives. Secondly, in chapter 1, verse 12 through 7:26, the preacher explains the nature of life. We're actually going to be finishing up that main point tonight. Thirdly, the preacher explains the meaning of life, which is 7:27 through 12:8. And then the preacher explains the conclusion about life in 12:9 through 14 as well. So that's the basic outline of the book of Ecclesiastes, just keying in on the preacher says. The preacher being the one who is writing the book, and we're assuming, based on a lot of internal and external evidence, that it was Solomon. We can't say that for sure, but it sure seems like it's kind of leaning that direction. So that's kind of where we are. This is interesting that I got to move this bar a little bit because it's floating over my notes, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm getting used to it. We're getting there. So look at Ecclesiastes. So we're under Roman numeral 2. The preacher explains the nature of life. And I want to share these things really briefly. These are the things, these were the titles, so to speak, of the lessons that we've had so far working through the book of Ecclesiastes. We talked about the wisdom of life without God is fleeting. It's vain. It's flying away. Wisdom of life without God is fleeting. Pleasures and possessions of life without God are fleeting. Again, if you want these slides, write me. I can get them to you in a JPEG form or post them to you or whatever, so we can get these to you as well. But pleasures and possessions of life without God are fleeting. A labor focused on this life alone that is outside of God, even that is fleeting. And even sometimes, even the right times, they come and go. Sometimes they're just fleeting, even though they're good things. Letter D was the destiny of life apart from God is fleeting. E was standing alone in life without God is fleeting. Unguarded actions in life are fleeting. The riches of life are fleeting, even when those riches are from God. Apart from them being centered on God, even though they came from God, they're still fleeting. They're vain. They're empty. They just come and they go. And then tonight we want to talk about the wisdom of life without the fear of God is fleeting. And by that, Solomon just means, in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 is where we're going to be, he just means that the wisdom of life, all of the wisdom that humanity can muster, from the smartest people gathered together, pouring out their brains over the world's greatest problems and greatest joys, wisdom of life without fear of God is that which just flies away. It's just fleeting. And that's where we want to be tonight as we walk through this. So let me in the beginning just give you this kind of introduction here a little bit. David McCullough, in his book Mornings on Horseback, tells a story about young Teddy Roosevelt. Mittie, his mother, had found he was so afraid of the Madison Square Church that he refused to set foot inside, if alone. He was terrified, she discovered, of something called the zeal. It was crouched in the dark corners of the church, ready to jump at him, he said. When she asked what zeal might be, he said he was not sure, but thought it was probably a large animal like an alligator or a dragon. He had heard the minister read about it from the Bible. Using a concordance, she read him those passages containing the word zeal until suddenly, very excited, he told her, "Stop! Wait a minute!" The line from the book of John 2:17, quote, "And his disciples remembered that it was written, 'The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up.'" People are still justifiably afraid to come near the zeal of the Lord. For if they are perfectly aware that it could indeed eat them up if they're not one of his. But our Lord is good, but he isn't safe unless you're his. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about the zeal of the Lord and our focus being on the Lord and everything in life being centered on him, because the wisdom of the world is not in any way worthwhile and lasting apart from God himself. That our Lord is good, but he isn't safe for anybody unless we're his. Everybody else will face him in fear. And that's sobering for us. That's sobering for me to realize that as a child of God, he has rescued me from that. But it's also sobering for me to realize that as a child of God, there are those around me that still face him in fear and could be afraid of the zeal of the Lord, just like Teddy Roosevelt was here, although him wrongfully in that. So let me ask you a couple of questions, and you can unmute your mic to answer and then mute it back up, and we'll go from there, and we'll see how things work with this. What are some things that dominate our attention daily? What are some things that dominate our attention daily? COVID-19. Say that again? Oh, COVID-19. Yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, you know what's funny is I wrote this Bible study before all of this stuff happened. So, yeah, COVID-19 are some things that dominate our attention. Any other thoughts?
Family, computers.
Family, computers, working from home. Yeah.
Dogs.
Getting old and dogs. I know those are two separate comments, kind of fit together. Even old dogs. Yeah, absolutely dominate for our attention every single day.
For those that are out of work now, paying the bills.
Yeah, paying the bills, how long work will last, even if they're not out of work yet, whether work will continue, how long will this last, how long do we have to be apart, how long is it going to be before we can get together publicly again? Oh, yeah, boy, there's so many things that vie at our attention. What are some things that redirect our focus on those things? What are some things that redirect our focus about those things, either towards those things or away from those things?
The Bible verses.
The media, other people.
Okay, other people, sometimes the media. Edie said Bible verses. Someone else said something there.
Companionship.
Oh yeah, companionship, just being together with each other, which is a real struggle right now. And I understand, different views of the virus and everything else, but what we're experiencing, the rollout from this virus is real and significant for a number, well, for all of us, but even more so for some people. Absolutely. Other things, other thoughts? So things that redirect our focus on those things. And by the way, don't be shy to push the unmute button and just say something. And I'll come back to you. It might be a little bit clunky here and there and all that stuff, but let's just we'll just keep moving forward here and see how things go. So listen, let's look at these verses, and I'll read them out for you in case you are on the video, and I don't know how well you can see it on the video there. A good name is better than good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart might be happy. Now, I would suggest, I know I'm putting the verses up here on the screen, but if you have a Bible nearby, or your app on your cell phone or tablet or something, I would encourage you that it's probably good to have these verses in front of you, because I am going to ask questions that refer back to it, and they'll probably pop off the screen by then. But we'll move forward. There's some hard thoughts in here, so I want to have some discussion on that. But let's look at the rest of the verses first. What did I miss? Yeah, a good name is better than ointment. The day of one's death is better than a day of one's birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. And this too is futility. Just one thing I want to point out from that one particular verse there that talks about the thorn bushes underneath the pot. That's really referring to the fire that's cooking underneath the pot. It's better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For as the crackling of the thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of a fool. It's like it's just burning up. It's going to be there and it's going to be gone in no time, is really what that's saying there. And this too is just futility. That means just fleeting. It's just flying away. So let me ask this question. In light of this, when we take a look at this, in reference to a good name, why might the day of one's death be better than that of one's birth? Because that, I don't know about you, but that seems to be almost the opposite of the way I normally think, because the birth is such a joyous thing, and death is so final. Why, in reference to a good name, and that's the point, is in reference to a good name, why might the day of one's death be better than that of one's birth?
They lived out
I
their
think for me to live, I think that it's because if you have a good name, like you're a Christian, you're right with God, and your day of your death will be better than your birth because you're going to be home with your Lord and Savior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I heard Debbie.
Yeah, I have two verses that come to mind. First one is, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain, and to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect to that. It's not talking about the fact that death is a pleasant thing. It certainly talks about the fact that we're all heading there, but that in the sense that all of that striving, all of the working towards the good name, it's complete. When you're born, the script is unwritten. Who knows? When you look at your children as a parent, as a grandparent, you look at your children and you have all these hopes and aspirations, and not necessarily you define every little thing out, but you certainly want them to grow up and be loving and love the Lord, and be able to navigate life in a way that is honorable, and all of those things. But at birth, you don't know how those things are going to work out. Whereas at the end, it's there, and without getting too personal, go ahead.
I was thinking, your good name, it's good when you're alive, but somehow or other people seem to remember more of the good of you once you've moved on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think sometimes, I just think sometimes in life, you can have a good reputation and all, but then, just like my dad died, he had a great reputation and all, but now that he's gone, it just seems that his reputation is amplified even 10 times more. And you probably realized that when your father passed too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think there's a good aspect to that as well. That's an interesting thought. Sorry. I don't know. I missed somebody's text there. But anyways, so yeah, I think Glenn is right in that that we're looking. Who's that? Is that Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying that I think death and mourning has a way of bringing us back to more meaning, as opposed to, oh, okay, I'm just gonna wake up, play video games, eat chocolate brownies, eat gummy bears, life's perfect. You don't really get true meaning from that, and I think that mourning and death has a way of bringing reality to attention, and what, more importantly, is the wisdom that comes with that.
What a great observation, Dan, and you're absolutely right. These are the kind of things that provide us opportunities not only to experience meaning, but to aid other people in the meaning of their lives as well, and engage with them in a way that is far deeper than the typical, getting together, patting each other on the back, spending some time, getting caught up, things like that. It certainly deepens our relationships in a way that that is deeply meaningful. So absolutely, I think that's a point well said. What's the recurring theme in verses 2 through 4? If you take a look at verses 2 through 4 there, what are the recurring themes that we see there? Okay, wisdom. Mourning.
The heart.
Yeah, it's all the heart, all the way down through there. And it's the pendulum swing contrasting of the emotions of the heart. 1 minute we're excited and doing things and elated, and the next minute we're struggling and battling hardships, difficulties, things that we didn't expect that were thrown at us, and all of those things. So absolutely, those things just continue to come our direction. And as we go down through those things, I think it just continues to reiterate verse number 2: sorrow better than laughter. For when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of the mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. And it's better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For that's just like crackling thorn bushes underneath the pot. That's the laughter of a fool. And all of those things are all of them are fleeting. And I think it's interesting to think about the fact, well, let me look at the next question here before I go on with that, because I might already be answering the question I'm asking. If verses 2 through 4 is focused more on reflection for living than on the experience of death, then what might these verses be saying to us? If we had to encapsulate all of these verses, 2 through 6, how would we encapsulate those to be what these verses are saying to us?
To be serious about what time you have on this.
Okay, Edie says to be serious about what time we have on this earth, to take it seriously, because what we have now, we may not have tomorrow. Boy, that's a reality now, isn't it?
Redeem the time.
Redeem the time, for it is short. Who knows? Who knows what's coming around the corner? I never expected this. Any other thoughts about those verses? What might these verses be saying to us if we were to put them in a summary form?
All is vanity.
It's showing a difference between wisdom and foolishness, because the wise man is looking at what is coming, whereas the foolish is only concerned about today.
Yeah, it's a
I think
sober.
also,
Go ahead.
I think also it talks about and what I see is that the wise, is not looking at like the perception of having a good time, the perception of having everything. That perception is not always accurate with what is wisdom and what is reality.
Yeah, I think it's dealing a lot with the perception as well when we go down through there, because I think sometimes we forget that even the hardships, as unpleasant as they are, even the hardships, God has a purpose for them, for us in everything as we walk down through that together, and that's absolutely truth as well. How might the idea conveyed in verses 5 and 6 relate to the first 4 verses? If we look at 5 and 6, how might the idea conveyed in verses 5 and 6 relate to the first 4?
Well, it definitely reflects off of the mirth, I mean, the end of verse 6 says, so is the laughter of a fool. And the end of verse 4 says, but the heart of fools is in a house of mirth. And he's just really reflecting back to that, what is in this life except that you eat, drink, and be merry? What else is there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting just to remember that the pendulum swing all the way down through here with all the emotions that are going back and forth in our feelings, all of our perceptions, all of our experiences in life. At the end of verse 6, really brings it to a head. I mean, if there was a climax in any of these verses, it's at the end of verse 6. Don't forget, whether it's joyful or hardship, it's fleeting. It's going to be here for a moment, and then it's going to be gone. And that's kind of answering my next question, was at the end of verse 6, what do you think is fleeting? I think what's fleeting is everything. Whatever we experience, whatever hardship there is, it's here, but it's not going to last forever. And whatever we're walking through now, we'll be done with. And whatever we're going to walk through later is still going to be. And whatever is done, right, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 15, whatever is done was what God wanted. I might not always understand that. I might not always even appreciate it or like it. But ultimately it's done, and it's what God wanted, and God has a reason and a purpose for it. And at that point, I have to trust God's wisdom in bringing that our way. Let's look at verses 7 through 9 so we can keep moving forward here. Verses 7 through 9. For oppression makes a wise man mad, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than the beginning. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Anger resides in the bosom of fools. How might these verses fit with the first 6 verses?
They just want to ignore.
Well, I think if you go back to your fulcrum of the pendulum, like Daniel was saying, the comparison was the full arc of the pendulum. It's death versus life. You know, I mean, it was the joy and then the disparity of death. Where this starts to deal with more, those two were the reality of life and death. And this is, I guess, the everyday aspect of it. Anger and just the responses that we have as we're going through it. Not the beginning or the end, but just the mundane part of it as we're walking through it.
Yeah. Look at this next question. Question is, how do the words oppression, patience, haughtiness, and anger relate to each other? How do they relate?
You feel that you have a right.
Spirit.
Okay. Edie says you feel you have a right. Glenn's talking about the emphasis being on the spirit.
All emotions, well, I mean, you can feel oppressed without being oppressed, but I mean, you know, haughtiness and anger, they're all things that people will feel that are not necessarily justified, and haughtiness is related to pride.
Yeah, did you notice?
They're kind.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you notice there's one of those terms that seems positive? Can you identify it and
I
where?
was going to say patience is kind of against everything else, because if you have patience, you're able to deal with the others.
Yeah,
Whereas oppression, haughtiness, and anger, you're just going off the deep end and you're not necessarily thinking things through.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, these couple of verses here, 7 through 9, we've talked about in this class on Wednesday nights, we've talked about different chiasms, which is a type of literary device that's used a lot in the Old Testament by way of parallelism. They didn't make poems that rhymed or that had certain rhythms like we did. Instead, they used a rhythm of thought. And if you notice in verses 7 through 9, there's a little miniature chiasm going on there. And that word patience is in the middle of it. So it steps into with the negative things, you know, the atrocities of the negative. It ends on the patience, and then it steps back out in 2 more negative things as well in the warnings form. It's a chiasm that's there that almost looks like a greater than arrow to emphasize the very center of that listen, whether it's good things in life or hardships, whether we're talking about celebrating the birth of life or the end of life, whether we're talking about making a great name for ourselves or striving to make a great name for ourselves, or we're finished making a name for ourselves, that ultimately it's all fleeting. And because it's all fleeting, we can be patient. We can wait. It's just for a moment. It might seem like at the moment forever, but it's here and it's gone.
I think
Go ahead.
I think that patience is a good thing, but we don't like to be patient. When we have to be patient, we feel oppressed, and that results in the holiness and anger.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't like to be patient. We are not a patient people. I mean, just look at our circumstances that we're in right now, right? I mean, in our circumstances, we're not finding ourselves being very patient people. We're hoarding paper products from the grocery stores, and because we're afraid that we might have to do without for a little bit. I think it's really interesting, having lived in Alaska for a while and going through the avalanches up there. And for almost 6 weeks, we were cut off on the peninsula from the rest of America, and we didn't have any products coming in. They finally had to start, after 6 weeks, airdropping things in, which was really kind of fun. And I look back at it now, and it's like, well, it was fun, but at the time it was a little bit stressful. So I look at this, and I watch what's going on. It's really interesting to see people who have never experienced this before, how truly difficult it is to not know where. Maybe it's not a matter of a paycheck or a job or anything else, but maybe they just don't know where the paper products they're used to are coming from, or whether or not they can have the hamburger they're used to, or the meals that they're used to, or and because we've gotten so used to it, and patience is not something that we're used to, especially in this culture. So I think that's an excellent point. It's a neat chiasm there. At the very end of this, I'll show you a chiasm so that you have a better idea for those of you that haven't been with us. But let's look at the next few verses here as well. And I might have to skip actually to the very end because we're just about out of time. Verses 10 through 12, do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it's not from wisdom that you ask about this. Wisdom along with an inheritance is good, an advantage to those who see the sun. For wisdom is protection just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. What a beautiful statement that is. Wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. How do these verses feel different than the first 9 verses? And how do they still connect with them? And rather than asking you the questions because of time, let me just give you a couple of thoughts. These verses feel very different. All of a sudden, we've left this pendulum swing and the chiasms that are in the first group of verses. And all of a sudden, it feels like Proverbs, doesn't it? All of these things, here's about wisdom, and wisdom with inheritance is good, advantage to those who see the sun, and it's a protection, just like money is a protection, and the advantage of knowledge, and something that preserves our lives as possessions. All of a sudden, we've got these Proverbs. In the midst of all of this pendulum swing of emotions of both good and bad, and born and dead, and all of these things that go back and forth through this process, we now find ourselves in a place where these proverbs, these general truths are given about life itself. And Solomon's just trying to say, look, in the midst of all of these things, you can find patience that leads to wisdom, so that you can kind of, in the pace of life, as it's fleeting, as it's experiencing the vanity of life, you can stop and catch your breath. It's kind of like the saying, this too shall pass. Know that this isn't going to last long. And engage in wisdom rather than foolish fretting. And allow things to just go and trust God in the process. Because the wisdom to be able to do that and set aside and engage in patience, like Kimberly said, is hard to do, is that which is the very thing that sustains us. As opposed to fighting against it and striving against it, pushing hard against it, and all of those things. Number 10 here as well. Why might these verses suggest we shouldn't spend our lives looking back at what we used to be? Number 11. Why might these... Go ahead.
It's kind of hard to move forward if you're focused on the past.
Yeah.
And if you're constantly looking behind you, like, try to imagine driving down the road concentrating in your rearview mirror. You're not going to be able to go ahead. It's the same thing. If we look at, what used to be, we're focusing on the past. We can't move forward. We can't see the good that God has for us now. Paul says, forgetting those things which are behind, I press towards the mark of the high calling of Christ. So we can't move forward if we're looking back.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you see verse 10 there? Why is it that these former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Why? Because what we have gone through in the past is what has brought us to this point of greater wisdom than what we had in the past in the first place. Like, if anybody ever says to you, hey, don't you wish you could be 16 again or 18 again or 22 again? It's like, no. because I was stupid. I'm still stupid, but at least I'm not as stupid as I used to be. Why would I want to go back to that? Go ahead, Glenn.
I was stupider.
Yeah. So we're all in that boat, and that's really what it's talking about. It connects with that by saying that's why every stage of life that we've arrived at, we shouldn't spend our time looking at what we were, what we should have been, what we could have been, rather than just appreciating and accepting what God has made us now. Because even the hardships that He took us through is what has helped make us to be what we are today. So even though I might not have liked those things, I wouldn't have chosen many of those things. It's because of those things that God made me who I am today. Praise the Lord for that. I don't have to be what I was. And hopefully in another 3 years and 10 years and 15 years, I won't be what I am now. I'll be even less stupider.
Another thing, when we look at the past, lots of times we only remember the good things. We don't remember the bad. So, they talk about the good old days, but are the good old days really that good?
Yeah, a lot of times they're not all that good either. Look at
I
the...
think somebody else said,
Go ahead.
I think someone else once said, you never look at somebody's photo album and see a picture of a funeral or someone, you know what I mean, on a breathing machine, or we tend to take pictures of the memories that we want to have. And I think that's what that saying is. When we look back, we always have that propensity to just look at the highlights as opposed to remembering the actual pitfalls that were involved back then too.
Absolutely.
There was a song from when I was a teenager. I mean, who sang it? Memories like the corners of my mind, misty something of the way we were.
Yeah.
Okay. You know the song I'm talking about.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
So
it's a good thing.
Yeah, we're not going to get through all of these things. So we're going to come back and we're going to pick up here with verses 13 through 14 next week. But I wanted to show you at the very end. I just want to get through here and show you the idea of the chiasm and give you a few things that you can take home with you out of this. And it goes a little bit slower than it does when we're doing this in person at church. So there we are. This is interesting. All this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H underneath the preacher explains the nature of life. All of those topics are chiastic. The picture that you see in front of you there, that's the chiasm in all of these main points. And it's interesting that if the center of those verses that we noticed earlier had the word patience in it, and that was the point, then the two center things in the chiasm here are D and E. And it's really interesting to see how each one of these things parallel. So you have A and H that parallel. The wisdom of life, that should be life, not lie. The wisdom of life without God is fleeting, and wisdom of life without the fear of God is fleeting. That's A and H. B and G moves a little bit closer to it. Pleasures and possessions of life without God are fleeting, and G is the riches of life are fleeting, even when they're from God. C and F, the labor focus on this life alone is fleeting, and unguarded actions, the labor in life, are fleeting of C and F. And when you get to the center, it's D and E. These are the main points. Destiny of life apart from God is fleeting. And standing alone in life without God is fleeting. So let me give you, that's just a thematic structure of Ecclesiastes, of Roman numeral number 2 there, which is, it's just really a beautiful chiastic structure of themes that he gives us here. 2 main points. On the way to their destiny, those who fear God are not alone. On the way to their destiny, and that's what he's talking about. All of life is fleeting. We're all on our way to destiny. On the way to that destiny, remember this. He said, because all of these things he gave and is saying, apart from God, these things are true. On the way to your destiny, those who fear God are not alone. Secondly, this, travel the paths of life. Travel your paths of life with God in view. Let me give you a couple of quick takeaways as we walk down through this. Number one, your story is not done. Verse 1. It's talking there about the fact that, death is better than birth. Yes, because death, that means your story is final. The good news is for many of us, praise the Lord, my story is not done. God's not finished with me yet. Our story is not done. Consider the work as of God. And when I say the work, I mean the work that we do and the things that we experience. Everything around us. Consider not only that your story is not done, but the work is from God himself. Number 3, peace is not found in the situation because the situations are fleeting. They're vain. The peace is found in the source. And all through Ecclesiastes, the source is God. That's where we find peace. Not in the absence of struggle in life or the resolution of struggles in life. We find peace in the source of life, God himself. Number 4, the one who fears God comes from fleeting life with both, comes forth from fleeting life with both wisdom and enjoyment of what is good. That's part of what you were talking about. Sometimes when we think back in life, all we remember are the good things. We don't remember the bad. Because the one who fears God comes forth from that fleeting life with both wisdom and enjoyment of what is good. God gives us that opportunity as we fear him. Number 5, you're in good company. No one's perfect. Verse 20, you are in good company, for no one's perfect. I just love that to death. When we look at verse 20, it just reminds us of that. And I know we didn't get a chance to do that in depth tonight, but verse 20, indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins. Listen, wherever you are in life, you're in good company. And I can relate to that. I love that takeaway from this chapter. The one who pleases God escapes life's traps. Those who please God escapes the traps of life. Those fleeting traps that are here that tend to snag us. If you're a child of God, you do not have to fear the zeal of the Lord, for its consummation of you will be that of comfort rather than fear. If you are a child of God, you do not have to fear the zeal of the Lord, for its consummation of you will be that of comfort rather than fear. Like we had in the beginning where Roosevelt was afraid as a child to go into the church. He was afraid of the zeal of the Lord. We don't have to fear that because this consummation of those who fear him is a comfort rather than fear itself. Well, I appreciate you joining us tonight and interacting a little bit. I'll stay on for a little bit here in case anybody wants to talk, but I'm gonna end the video here as well so that